A ghost can be a lot of things: a memory, a daydream, a secret, grief, anger, guilt. But in my experience, most times, they're just what people want to see. Most times, a ghost is a wish. The Haunting of Hill House manages to show us a broken family dynamic in the best way that it possibly can, through horror. Weaving a story that is both spooky and intriguing, Mike Flanagan twists his way through the halls of Hill House to unfold every complicated and tragic story within its withering walls. Families are complex, and houses hold their stories. The narrative of every family that has lived there is in the bones and the facade of every home. Hill House focuses mainly on one particular story, that of the Crain family. Today, we'll take a look at their story and their dynamic as we go into a deep dive on the Haunting of Hill House. We'll do a breakdown for each episode, and then at the end, we'll do an analysis of the symbolism and meaning within that dynamic. Let's get started.
You are an eater. You eat it and you shit it out, and then and only then is it real for you.
We first meet the 5 Crain children of Hill House, minus Theo, as their father and Stephen, one of the boys, goes to check on them room by room. We learn that Nell has nightmares and isn't fond of Hill House. She talks about a woman that she sees in her dreams, the bent neck lady. Even that name sounds absolutely terrifying. Her dad tells her that sometimes dreams spill over into the waking world, that her dreams had breached the line between the two worlds, and that that's all she's seeing. Later, we see another Crain child, Shirley, and she's been talking in her sleep. It sounds harmless enough, but you realize soon that dancing girl in red room is actually an ominous message. Olivia and Hugh, our Hill House parents, make light of the situation, but when we are back in the room with Nell, we see a ghostly image and learn that there may be more to the children's fears than originally thought. In the next scene, we are transported to the future, more specifically to a future Stephen Crain. All of the children are adults and have their own lives. Stephen is a writer who focuses on paranormal experiences, but he's skeptical of these experiences, to say the least. We learn that he has written several books, even one about Hill House itself. He tells his story interviewee that he has never experienced anything paranormal. He merely writes stories about those who have. He gets a call from Nell, and the scene shifts to her as she looks at her phone quietly unnerved. Stephen declines her call. Then she calls Shirley, who also declines her call. Shirley, who owns a funeral home, listens to Nell's message after an important meeting with a prospective client. Nell is distressed and says that things are quote-unquote twisted. She also asks about Luke, her twin. Shirley ends up calling her back, but she doesn't pick up. We jump back into the past, Nell's past. She's back in Hill House, sleeping alone without her twin brother Luke on the couch. She is visited by a spirit that hangs directly above her. The spirit's hair swings down above Nell's face, and Nell is understandably terrified. Shirley has a flashback of her own to Hill House. She gets a key to a secret door upstairs from the groundskeeper. Nell says that the groundskeeper and quote-unquote that lady are weird. We'll learn about her in a bit. Unfortunately, they don't get to open the door because the key doesn't work. Stephen and Shirley talk on the phone about how Nell sounded when she called. Stephen is largely dismissive of both Nell and Luke and implies that Luke is probably back into substances and that he doesn't want to deal with it. Shirley feels like she has to take on the responsibility of her siblings' problems and gets frustrated with Stephen at the lack of interest. Stephen is very cynical about his work, his family, and even about himself. He tells Nell that he talked to the rehab facility and that Luke is doing well. There wasn't enough information on the phone call to discern whether or not this was a lie that Stephen was telling Nell's voicemail. Theo is next on the list of Hill House kids we're meeting as adults. We start to see a bit of a pattern start to emerge within the family. Luke is the screw-up, Nell is depressed, Theo is a disconnected loner, Stephen is trying desperately to separate himself from his family, and Shirley is parentified. Theo lives on Shirley's property. They both sit on the porch drinking. Apparently something happened between Theo and Nell in LA, and Theo is still waiting for an apology for that. This would explain why Theo didn't get a call from Nell. Theo continues to emphasize boundaries when it comes to Nell and Luke. When Shirley expresses her worry for the two, it seems cold for Theo to suggest that her sister create boundaries. Even though this might be the best advice, I don't know that this is what Shirley was looking for in that moment. As the parental figure sibling, it can be hard to create boundaries, but I feel like in that moment she needed comfort, and because of Theo's large disconnect from herself, her family, her feelings, everyone, she wasn't really given any. Nell ends up calling her dad and tells him that she's seeing the bent neck lady again, like she did when she was a child. Hugh asks her where she is, and she explains that she's in her home, but she's not. She's gone over to Hill House. Hugh knows by the tone of her voice that things are not good, and he runs to meet her there. Hugh has clearly had to make some tough choices because of this house, and he knows its power, which is why he's freaking out. In a flashback, we see that Hugh had to flee the home with all the kids in the car in the middle of the night, without Olivia, the children's mother, and his wife. It's hard to tell if the siblings have a connection to each other or the house, but once Nell goes into a certain room in the house, they all wake up at the same time, with a choking sensation. Shirley even says Nell is in the red room. It's here that we start to see the ties between their childhood and their adulthood. We also learn that Luke actually is in rehab. Stephen debunks the woman he interviewed by making practical assumptions about the visions of her husband, which are incredibly disturbing, by the way. He says that ghosts are wishes. Ghosts are not actual paranormal beings, rather, they are manifestations of whatever our psyche draws up. Our needs, past, wants, desires, and secrets, that's what ghosts are. Stephen has a sordid history with his writing. When he gives his book about Hill House to Shirley, she is aggravated by the way that they're all portrayed, by the way her mother specifically is portrayed. She suggests Steve is selling his family out for money and that he is making his family look bad in order to do it. The night that Hugh left, we learned that Olivia had unalived herself. The press had gotten a hold of the story and made it sound much more sensational, probably something along the lines of like Amityville. Anyway, this is why Shirley wants to stress the importance of Stephen hurting their family, because they have already been hurt by this sort of story, and it's even worse coming from her sibling. Even though we see her being supportive, it's clear that they end up getting a divorce at the end of the day. The Dudleys, the groundskeeper and his wife, the woman that Nell was talking about, they live nearby and stay on the grounds to keep watch over the house. They never stay the night though. They're very religious, and Olivia makes a point to say that her children are educated beyond just one religious belief when they have an encounter with Stephen. Stephen and Luke have a moment in the treehouse as kids. Luke's drawings are kind of disturbing, and he says that he sees a little girl in the woods. We see them again as adults having a moment, but the moment isn't about bonding. It's to highlight that Stephen thinks Luke is a lost cause. Luke is seemingly stealing from Stephen, so it's a gut punch. When Stephen gets in his apartment, he's surprised to see Nell, but she isn't saying anything and she looks very, very sad. Then Stephen gets a call from his dad. Nell is dead.
You good, Luke?
Uh-huh.
Don't forget the rule. Lights flash.
Time to come home.
Shirley is the second oldest in the family. She's grounded, a bit guarded, and likes to exert a motherly role over her siblings. This sometimes takes an emotional toll on her already delicate disposition. She takes on a ton of pro bono work, leaving her business to suffer. She pays for Luke's fancy rehab facility at her own free will. This causes the relationship with her siblings to suffer because she's exhausted by their needs, and with worry for them. She doesn't know it yet, but this will also take a toll on her marriage. We see a bit of that motherly sense in her when she talks one of her client's children into allowing his grandmother to have a viewing at her funeral. The little boy doesn't want to see his grandmother because she has been visiting him. Her visits were fine at first, but then her exterior started to deteriorate, so he doesn't want to see her that way. This show depends on some incredibly unreliable narrators creating a very preternatural tone for it. You just can't decipher what's really happening. Is it real? Is it not real? Is it made up? Is it supernatural? It makes things both scary and complex. Young Shirley talks to her mother about the blueprints for their forever home. It's her mother's dream home for her family. She tells Shirley that when you're little, your imagination comes easy, but when you're an adult, you can create things from your imagination. This isn't limited to dreams, though. The ghosts in your childhood transform into real problems as an adult. They'll haunt you until you've learned to cope with them. The lens you see your monsters through as an adult can be much scarier than anything you'd ever dreamt of when you were a child. Young Shirley finds a wasp's nest in a shed with kittens. After expressing that she would like to keep them because the kids are constantly hearing dogs on the property and she's scared for their safety, she's allowed to bring them inside. The groundskeeper mentions that there are no dogs on the property, and the show never really explains it, so we'll have to come back to that one at the end. While sleeping, young Shirley and Theo have a paranormal encounter simultaneously. In Shirley's room, they cuddle together while a loud banging bursts through the room, moving from wall to wall. Hugh runs to them, but eventually just dismisses their experiences, telling them that it was probably the pipes or something, which is kind of insane. We start to see that Hugh has a hard time taking everyone's experiences seriously. To make matters worse, young Shirley's kittens die. When we first see the kitty pass, it's shown alongside the adult Shirley's timeline for when she figures out that Nell has passed. It's a surreal moment because while young Shirley is learning about death and eulogizing the kitty, she notices its mouth starts to move. It turns out that there's a bug inside the kitty's mouth, and Shirley is traumatized by this, understandably. When all of her kitties eventually die, she is reminded by Olivia that kitties kitties need their mother and that's why they passed away. Hugh and Olivia are obviously upset by how all of this went down because Olivia thinks it was a mistake for Hugh to let her have the kitties in the first place. She's worried about Shirley and how this might affect her development on the topic of death. We get a brief glimpse at a minor fight, but also a slight instability within Olivia, one that will be in full force by the end of the series. Meanwhile, adult Shirley has taken in the idea of her sister's death and she's agreed to embalm her. It's a cathartic moment until she sees a bug crawl out of Nell's mouth, just like she saw with the kitten. Nell has unalived herself, and this adds a sting to the layer of grief for her siblings. They lost their mother the same way, and they all knew how that felt. And it was an unwritten rule, a promise amongst them to never put each other through that pain again. Shirley tells Nell that she is sorry for not being there, but more specifically, that she's sorry she ruined her big day by trying to fix it. See, when Nell was getting married, Shirley discouraged Luke from being there. She pushed Luke away when Nell wanted him there. She's going out of her way to fix things that no one asked her to fix, and she doesn't necessarily know what's best for everyone. We see the same mentality when she claims to Stephen that none of the siblings want the blood money from his book about Hill House. He misrepresented her and their mother. It hurts her, and I get that, but she makes the decision for everyone to avoid the payout, which isn't fair. She stands on principle, though. Until she doesn't. She has a vision of a man a couple of times in this episode and later in the season. His reveal isn't until the very end, though. So we just see him periodically with no reference, tipping a glass to her from across the way. Just wanted to note that for later.
I'm so sorry our last words were in anger. They weren't our last.
Theo is a spicy little girl and adult woman. She says the things that are on her mind in a very crass way. She is far more guarded than Shirley and puts up a brick wall toward the people around her. She is a practical person, but she's also incredibly intuitive. She doesn't shy away from her intuition or deny it. However, she restricts its uses, only pulling it out during sessions with the kids she counsels. Her wall is driven by her own sensitivity to the people around her. Their feelings and thoughts are too much. They're all-encompassing, and she has a hard time separating herself. But she does it, sometimes, for the people that she cares about. A flashback to young Theo tells us that she is a force to be reckoned with. She stands up to adults for her siblings and asserts herself in situations where her younger siblings might be uncomfortable. When Luke is chastised by Miss Dudley, the groundskeeper's wife, for playing in the dumbwaiter, Theo calms the situation and tells her that she shouldn't address Luke in the way that she is. Later in adulthood, asserting boundaries is still important to Theo, but her words have turned to cement and her boundaries have become a barricade. She's a fortress. Theo makes the mistake later of allowing Luke to ride in the dumbwaiter one night. He ends up stuck in the basement with a zombified monster. When Luke tells Olivia and Hugh about the monster, they don't believe him, but Theo does, and she sets out to prove that he's telling the truth by looking for herself. She listens and she cares about the people around her. Olivia tells her that her sense of touch, being able to see what other people's thoughts and feelings are, it's a form of shining, and if you're not familiar with that term, they don't say it in the show, but if you're familiar with King's work, you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, she gives Theo gloves to help her manufacture control over her ability. Her touch is how she knew that Luke wasn't lying. It's great to see her use her ability for good because adult Theo is so in tune with her child clients. She meets an adopted little girl, and the girl tells her that she sees a smiling man in her basement. She's terrified of the man and describes him as an entity that is smiling, but he isn't happy. Theo touches the girl, but after the touch, mentions that the little girl's a lot like her. She has a wall up to protect herself. She heads to the little girl's house on an intense hunch that something more is happening. We find out that the little girl is being taken advantage of in the worst way possible by her adoptive father. She calls and reports him, and he's arrested. We cut back to adult Theo looking at Nell on the slab, and she has the intense need to touch Nell to see what's in her mind. She regrets it instantly, and we don't learn everything that she saw until the last episode. Whatever it was must have been profound because she ends up calling the girl from the club that she met the other night, and really she wanted to get rid of in the first place. Theo gets stress relief from dancing, and when she goes out, she meets people, and the girl from the other night that she met, she kind of shooed her away after they were intimate. So it's odd that she's calling her once again, and even more odd when she begins to open up to this girl. We also learn that Theo took the money from Stephen's book to do something good for it, to get her PhD and help the children that she helps now. She's not thrilled that Stephen wrote the book, but she also just kind of wants the money.
I don't know how to do this without you.
I learned a secret. There's no without. I am not gone.
Seeing the main characters through other people's experiences is something that happens a couple times in Hill House, and that's how we're introduced to Luke's storyline. While Luke is in a group session, we hear one of the members talk about his experiences in the war with gruesome detail. He explains that he uses to make the visions of what he has seen go away. He only succeeds at making the visions of his horrors worse for himself when he uses. Using only hinders the healing process. It dampens the associated feelings, but only for a moment. Luke is constantly deciding between a lifetime of pain or a moment of content. Luke decides, at least for 90 days, that he wants to stay clean, and he's successful. Although Luke is proud of his accomplishments, he feels like he can't share these things with his siblings. When the facilitator says that Stephen called to check on Luke and that Luke should tell him about his 90-day chip, he dismisses her. He tells her that Stephen wouldn't believe him because he doesn't believe in him. No one has ever believed Luke, except for Nell, who is intuitively connected to her brother, and him to her. They have a twin bond that cannot be severed by the woes of life. It's a twin thing. Luke has a friend at the clinic that he seems close to. They have shared experiences through shame and guilt. Guilt and fear, they're sisters. It seems that his friend Joey has been in for much longer than him and has been doing well for herself so far. A flashback of Joey and Luke shows them outside of the clinic. They're having dinner with Lee and Stephen. They talk about the ins and outs of rehab, and Joey takes a moment to wax philosophical on her recovery when she is uncomfortably pressured to by Stephen. She tells him that she's taking things day by day. That's all she can do, really. Luke clocks Stephen for playing dirty at the dinner table, and Stephen lays into him, telling him that she's just a junkie and that he basically only allows Luke in because he loves him. There is understandably some built-up animosity between the two. Luke has taken advantage of Stephen more than once, but Luke is also trying so hard, and it's hard to see him fail in this way. I don't know what the right answer is in this situation, love and acceptance or guarding yourself. It seems like both parties are right to have their feelings about the other. It's just very complicated. Joey leaves the center and Luke gets a message from Nell, whom he doesn't know is deceased yet. She tells him to go, and he just assumes that this means that he needs to find Joey. He does, and she's been using. Luke will do anything to get Joey back to the facility clean, but he has no money. He decides to steal from Stephen and encounters him on the way out. He's never going to live down the reputation he built with Stephen, so he doesn't really bother saying much of anything about what's going on. He just takes the money. He needs it for a hotel to keep him and Joey off the street for the night. But Joey ends up stealing from him and leaving him to get mugged. Luke looks so defeated when he calls the facility from a payphone asking to come back by himself. The facilitator interrupts with the news that Nell is dead, and she and Stephen make plans to pick Luke up and whisk him over to Nell's funeral. One feature of Luke's addiction is that he still sees the tall man wearing his bowler hat. Luke, as a child, used to see a tall man in the halls of Hill House, and his demons still haunt him today. He presumably uses to get rid of the tall man. He also uses steps to get away from the tall man. Sometimes these steps work and the man stays away. Sometimes they don't and the man gets closer, like a program that is supposed to guide you through your addictive pressures. In order to fix things and right wrongs, you must endure the steps of the program. Sometimes the program works, sometimes the entity lurks from afar. It's ever present though. You can't get rid of your demons. You just do your best to keep them as pets. You nourish them instead of running from them. You can't run from your own mind. Young Luke tells Nell that she needs to count in order to get rid of her demons. I also think that this might be a form of OCD that Luke is developing, but it's never formally diagnosed because he ends up self-medicating instead. The count to 7 represents the children and their parents, their lifelines, their family. We also see him many times talking to a little girl named Abigail. Her presence is relevant later, but I just wanted to make note of it. Young Luke gets a hat from his father. His dad makes a point to say that Luke's hat is a big boy hat, that he needs to stop believing in nonsense, basically. It's the tall man's hat now.
Loved you completely. And you loved me the same. That's all. The rest is confetti.
There are so many things I feel about Nell's story. It's equal parts tragic and haunting to watch her reveal. As we know, both young and adult Nell are haunted by the bent neck lady on occasion, and she finally wants to do something about it as an adult. She goes to a sleep tech and explains that she has paralysis when she's sleeping and that she sees this entity. The sleep tech believes her and validates her unusual experiences. It makes her feel so seen and heard, something that she has never really felt before. I mean, Luke understood her when they were younger, but their paths have diverged so much that he's impossible to talk to now. The tech ends up asking her out, and this is how she meets the love of her life and her future husband, Arthur. Arthur is a light for Nell. A montage of their lives play out until their proposal, and you can tell that Nell is the happiest she's ever been. Moreover, her new husband can help her during her episodes of paralysis. He turns on the lights and instructs her to breathe through the moment. He's kind and gentle with her. During Nell's wedding, she has so many poignant moments, but the one where she sees her mother next to her dad is one that hits the hardest. She also wishes desperately that Luke had shown up. He did, of course, but Shirley just shooed him away, so it doesn't matter. Nell and Arthur start their lives together in California. One night, Nell has a paralysis moment. Arthur helps her out, like usual, but when he gets up to turn the light on, he's struck by a sudden pain and falls to the floor. Nell attempts to save him, but she can't move. Eventually, she goes to his side and he's gone. Nell screams in anguish. Apparently, Arthur had unfortunately suffered from a fatal aneurysm, a bit of a freak occurrence considering the timing. Nell is convinced that the bent neck lady that haunts her is to blame. She also kind of blames herself. We see Nell fall into a deep despair. She reaches out to her closest sibling about how she's feeling, but Luke is too hopped up to feel or hear anything. Her cries for love and just to be cared for go unnoticed. The scene is made even more gut-wrenching when Luke asks Nell to buy him stuff in order to level out before he heads back to rehab. She obliges and looks absolutely defeated at this point. That's when the bent neck lady shows up again. Nell tells her therapist about what's been happening with her, that Arthur made the bent neck lady go away, and now she's back. She blames the house and seems to be becoming unhinged. The therapist prescribes her medication, but doesn't really listen to her as much as he maybe should. She doesn't take her medication, and she ends up attacking Theo and Steven. Her attacks aren't entirely unwarranted, but her words aren't coming out in the most constructive way. Her therapist also put an idea in her head that she needs to confront the house head on. She needs to see that the house is just a house, that it is nothing but wood and nails. But we know that this isn't true. The house is a living entity. It can eat you up from the inside. Nell starts to lose track of time while she's staying nearby at a hotel, the same hotel that Hugh took the kids that crazy night. She sleeps all day, and it's clear that this girl is just manic depressive, grieving, and going through episodes of instability over and over again. She calls her dad in one last effort to be heard. He hears her, but it's still too late to save her. She goes into the house and starts seeing visions almost immediately. Visions of her wedding party, visions of her mother, visions of her and her siblings as children, and more importantly, visions of Arthur. She dances with Arthur into the Red Room, and when they get in there, she's greeted by her mother at the top of the stairs. It's there where her mother puts a locket on her, and eventually the locket turns into a rope as her mother pushes her over the railing, and after Nell is over the railing, she breaks her neck. And as she breaks her neck, she realizes that she is the bent neck lady. She goes through the various scenes where she had seen in her waking life, or in her alive life, I guess, the bent neck lady. And those episodes are her looking at herself.
Bullshit.
You want to hear this or not?
Haunted house. You don't
What,
even
Steve?
get it.
I don't get it.
You don't get it. You're the ghost. You are, Dad. You're the spectral presence.
Come on, Steve.
Theodora and Shirley talk through the odd practicalities that come with funerals. Making someone look as if they're alive and only sleeping feels like a way for everyone to just cope. It's really just wishful thinking though, says Theo. Nell has created a situation where all of her family has no choice but to get together and interact with one another. Converging all of these personalities together in one room is going to be chaotic. Stephen is having a meltdown and starts seeing Nell outside of her casket. The mood is angry, somber, and confused all at once. When Hugh shows up, we see a brilliant image of all of his children, as they were. It's a full circle moment. The episode is filmed as one continuous shot, giving the audience a sense of inescapable sadness. You want a pause, a break, and it just keeps going. Hugh sees Nell in her casket, but she isn't an adult. She's the young Nell that he used to know. These are Hugh's babies that he is looking at, and this episode really drives that home. Hugh is a good and sometimes misguided man. He looks for the bathroom at the funeral home, and as Hugh is walking the halls, they turn into the halls of Hill House, and he turns into a younger version of himself. And there's a storm outside. This is the night that Nell disappeared, and she is talking to her mother about seeing the bent neck lady in the other room. Olivia tells her that she sees things too sometimes, but that those things can't hurt them and don't want to hurt them, but that's a lie. The windows break in Hill House, and Hugh loses everyone in the ensuing bustle. We track the halls with him to find Nell and to barricade areas of the house that have exploded. The house is yelling at the Crains now. A dog runs through the foyer where the children are. It's pandemonium, again with the dogs though. We flash back to present day, and Hugh has to confront his children about that night. He wants to protect them and he's holding back, but he needs them to know that Nell and Olivia were not mentally ill. He talks to himself to prove that, and Stephen points out that he's also mentally ill. The tension breaks for a moment, and they talk lovingly about remembering Nell, with all of the Nellisms. Hugh tells them stories about Nell and how she really truly loved her family. It's such a beautiful moment. Tension breaks out again, and the siblings aren't just attacking Hugh, they're attacking each other. Shirley goes for the throat on Stephen, calling him a sellout. Theo tells her to get off of her high horse and reveals that she also took the money and that she's tired of Shirley's high and mighty self. Shirley's own husband tells her that he took the money behind her back. She's devastated, and the two leave to get more alcohol. Stephen and Hugh go at it again, and Stephen tells Hugh the wrong parent died. That's apparently all Nell needs to hear, and her casket flops onto the ground, breaking the moment. A heavy gloom hangs over the rest of the episode. We close out with young Nell's prophetic words. She's feeling unseen and unheard, and during a big storm she vanishes while holding Theo's hand. Her family, desperately trying to find her, looks all around the house. They call to her and they go into the rooms of the home, but she's nowhere to be seen. At the end of the episode, she tells her family that she was screaming and crying and wailing, and she was right there the whole time, but that they couldn't see her. She could see them, they were so close to her, but they just looked right through her.
You and your sisters and your brother were the best part of my
We start the episode with Hugh being questioned by the police, or more like accused. Hugh is on the chopping block for Olivia's sudden demise. We take a trip down memory lane to when Hugh found mold in the walls of Hill House. This could arguably be the downfall of the entire family. There's a mold festering within their walls. This mold is impossible to get to. It's stuck behind thick layers of wall and brick. Hugh asks Olivia to create new blueprints to better understand where the piping is so that they can deal with the mold issue. The plans that she gives him are clearly not what he expected from his reaction. And at this point, Mr. Dudley feels he needs to step in. He tells Hugh that he's worried about whether or not Olivia might need some space from the house. At first, Hugh is resistant to this idea, but Mr. Dudley drives home the point when he tells him stories of other women who have had experiences in the home. He talks most in depth about the women he knows. Those are his mother and his own wife. Mr. Dudley divulges that his wife Clara had a stillbirth within the walls of the house and that she heard her baby's first cries at night in those walls. Neither of the Dudleys return after nightfall because they are too afraid of what they may encounter at the house. Avoiding the house during the night helped to make the bad feelings, the nightmares, the crying, all of it go away. It drives the point into Hugh that Olivia might be experiencing something. He may have to get her away from the house for a while. But the Dudleys can't run from trauma, and Hugh cannot wish away his wife's mental health in a weekend away. Hugh was listening and agrees that maybe Olivia should have some time outside the house. He proposes this to her, and she agrees that maybe she needs some time away. They plan for her to go to her sister's house, especially after Olivia sees that she's been creating the blueprints for her forever home within the piping blueprints of her right now home. Young Hugh literally tears the house apart brick by brick in order to get at whatever's in the walls, and he finally finds something, but it's not what he anticipated. The scratching he's been hearing that he thinks are rats, it's actually just skeletal remains, and more specifically, the remains of Mr. Hill, who used to live at the home. It appears he bricked himself up within the walls of the house and then changed his mind and tried to claw his way out. So his ghost was trying to claw his way out of the bricks, and that's what Hugh was hearing. Older Hugh is plagued by the thought that he should be doing more for his kids, and he allows himself to be guided by Olivia. She is his inner voice now. He tries to relate to Luke when Luke says that he's seeing things, but it doesn't really work because Luke has already felt so unheard and unseen for such a long time that he's numbed himself to the bone. Hugh is no longer able to get through to him. It's sad because Hugh is trying desperately to fix things, but he just isn't doing a good job of it. He's just not doing well. When the funeral's over, Luke books it out of there, and Hugh watches him but doesn't say anything, which is a mistake. He takes Shirley's card and Theo's car. Shirley also accuses Luke of breaking her scale replica of her mother's forever home, but both Theo and Hugh saw an entity do that, so it wasn't him. Stephen and Hugh go track Luke down while Shirley stays at her house and mostly in her office. She doesn't want to hand out candy to trick-or-treaters, so she just sort of retreats away. But she hears a knock at the door. She opens it, there's no one there, and then she hears a banging, and then there's more banging, and then there's banging on the windows. She goes outside to confront the rabid trick-or-treaters, but they aren't there. Theo is, however, there. In the last episode, Theo was hanging out in a suggestive way with Shirley's husband in a dark area. It didn't really look good for her. Shirley is beyond angry about this, and she kicks both parties out of their living quarters. Theo, living in Shirley's guest house, does not want to leave and comes to apologize. She argues with Shirley and tells her that she's absolutely impossible. There is no talking to her because she thinks she can do no wrong, that she's perfect and the rest of her siblings are screw-ups. The argument only stops because there is another series of loud banging noises that occurs. It's all over the house, just like when Theo and Shirley were younger. It's another full circle moment. After the moment passes, Shirley gets a call about her card. It's been used at a gas station near Hill House, and so they know exactly where to go. Everyone knows the stakes are high with Luke. He's prone to addiction, but also because he's a twin, the odds of suicidality increase with siblings and especially in twins. They all run there to meet up with him. While on the way, Shirley and Theo have a blowout fight, and Nell intervenes in the creepiest way possible. Theo freaks out and she tells Shirley what she saw the night she touched Nell. It was nothing, an emptiness. She felt absolutely nothing for the first time in her life, and she isn't sure if that was what death feels like or if that was what Nell felt like, but the emptiness scared her, and for a while it stayed with her. And she felt the shame of trying to kiss Shirley's husband, but it was the first time that she had felt anything, and so she was willing to feel it. She didn't see Shirley's husband when she went in for a kiss. She just saw a light at the end of a tunnel. She saw a way out of the numbness that existed in her soul. The moment bonds the two sisters together.
I mean bad ones. I mean positively screaming memes. The worst of the worst. What would you do?
Olivia has been such an enigma up until now, and finally we get to see her and her backstory. She and Miss Dudley clean up the explosive mess in the house from the night before with the storm. She tells Miss Dudley that her father had unexpectedly passed away from a car accident. At first, she couldn't feel anything at all, but then she made rocks fall from the sky. Hail at first, then a massive wave of stones. We already know that Olivia seems to have some sort of shine to her, and she has passed the shine on to her children. She claims the hail of rocks was an anomalous event that happens sometimes, but you can tell that she thinks there's something more to that. We've seen Olivia suffer through headaches in every episode, and that's elaborated on much more in this episode. They're becoming far more intense, and she is having a hard time really just getting through the day. Worse than headaches, though, Olivia starts to see things in the house. These are the ghosts of souls that have passed on. During these events, she thinks that she's dreaming, and she meets a flapper girl, Poppy, who goes into deep detail about losing her children. She spreads paranoia to Olivia that her children are at risk. She tells Olivia that her children have dreams, dark dreams, dreams about sadness and emptiness. Poppy asks Olivia if she would wake them from a slumber when they were having those dreams to protect them. Of course, Olivia says that she would wake them from those dreams. When Olivia wakes up, she's holding a screwdriver to Hugh's neck. She's lost control completely. Olivia becomes more and more paranoid, and when her thoughts are emboldened by a very well-meaning Clara, aka Miss Dudley, she becomes even more staunch in her stance to protect her children from the outside world, because the outside world wants to eat them up, and she can't let that happen, even if it means that she will eat them up first. Olivia tells Hugh that she's scared and she doesn't feel anything more than scared these days. They end up expediting her trip and they move it up a couple days. She's in a hotel, she calls Hugh, and it seems like he has absolutely nothing under control, so she feels compelled to come back instead of staying away and healing. We finally learn about what happened that night. Shirley comes downstairs and her mom is in the kitchen. She looks like a zombie. She's convinced that she's dreaming. She tells Shirley in a loopy way that the kittens don't need their mom anymore. She's clearly feeling left out, left behind, and unnecessary. She beckons the twins into the red room for tea. She finds Abigail in the bed instead of Luke. Luke is on the floor, and now they're all invited to the tea party. Shirley wakes up Hugh to tell him that Olivia's acting weird. He sees some rat poison on the counter in the kitchen and he puts things together. He runs through the house looking for his children and finally he sees them in the red room. He grabs the kids and gets them out of there, but it's too late for Abigail. She's already drank the tea. Hugh grabs all of the rest of the kids and hustles them into the car at night. Olivia stalks the house for her children calling to them. Meanwhile, the flapper girl Poppy is in her ear about how Hugh is going to take the children and do bad things to them. Olivia goes to Abigail and asks her if she's awake now. She's disturbed by what she's done, but she also still contends that it was the right thing to do. At the end of the episode, we see the family enter the home for the first time in the past. They venture off into the house's various rooms, leaving Olivia downstairs by herself. Olivia tells Hugh, "You guys go on without me." He retorts, "How could we?"
This room is like the heart of the house. No, not a heart, a stomach.
The confrontation with the house is pure chaos. Luke was unsuccessful at burning the house to the ground. Stephen and Hugh show up first to find him. But then out of nowhere, we're with Stephen and Lee. Lee is heavily pregnant and Stephen says that he doesn't even remember coming back home. Lee starts to drag him through the mud, calling him an eater. We start to learn what's really going on. Stephen is still in the house. All of the entities are on full display now, and Hugh needs to protect Stephen from their glare. "Look at me," he says to Stephen. He's trying to protect him just the way he did when he was younger, when he was getting him out of the house and he didn't want him to see his mother, to save him from the bad memories. But the house has already gotten a hold of all the kids. We see various flashbacks of hope melt away. The house shows the kids what they want to see and then sullies what they're seeing by killing their hope and bringing their insecurities to life. Luke sees Joey at a hotel, and everything looks well, but her eyes start to melt. Stephen sees Lee pregnant, but she still hates him. Shirley sees the man that she's been seeing the whole time. We just learn now that she had an affair with him when she was out of town. Her carefully constructed image is exposed. Theo is with the girl from the bar. They're connecting, but then there are many hands touching her, making her feel uncomfortable and claustrophobic. All of the children meet in the red room. Hugh has been left outside this time. Luke dies and he's transported to a more lively version of the red room, and it's a tea party with Abigail and Nell. Olivia urges him to stay with them, but Nell tells him to go. She wants him to leave because if he accepts a seat, he will stay there forever. Olivia tells him that he's been knocking on death's door for years and that he definitely wants this. He decides not to and wakes up in the red room with his siblings. They see Nell in the room with all of them. All of them see her now. She is on repeat, but she's telling them that all the children have been in the red room before. It was never locked. It was never boarded up. It just looked like different rooms to each one of them. A tree house for Luke, family room for Shirley, a dance studio for Theo, a playroom for Stephen. The house was gathering their thoughts and their feelings, and it was using those things against them. Nell tells them that time is nonlinear and that she used to think that it just ran in a straight line. But moments fall like rain, she says. That's why they've all been in the room without knowing they were in the room. Their escapism fed the house's needs. Nell leaves them with parting words, saying that she loved them all and that they loved her, and that's all that mattered. We return outside the Red Room to see that Hugh is being tormented by Poppy, and Liv tells her to go away. She still contends that the monsters are outside of the house, not inside like Hugh thinks. Life is going to happen no matter what. You cannot save your children from everything. Hugh tells Liv that she has to relish the beautiful moments and watch them grow no matter how hard it feels to do that. If that growth ends in suffering, then you can't do anything to change it. This is the tough realization that every parent must suffer through. No matter how lonely or frustrating or heartbreaking, you have to just sit there with your feelings about things. Hugh agrees to stay with Olivia in the house if she lets the children go, and she agrees. Before Hugh leaves, he sends Stephen off with the truth about his mom and the Dudleys. The Dudleys asked to stay at the house in order to be there for their little girl. Her soul is trapped there now. They eventually die with her. They also have the privilege of seeing their newborn daughter alive in the house, which is such a gift. It's an incredible watch, a very well thought out way to capture life in essence. Obviously, Hill House captures many different themes: marriage, loneliness, grief, depression, etc. There probably isn't an area of life and feelings that Hill House doesn't explore. I've never quite seen a story that will humanize a woman who killed a child, but this one dared to do exactly that. So let's talk about the symbolism and theories of Hill House.
Forgiveness is warm, like a tear on a cheek. Think of that and of me.
It's not hard to make some surface level observations about Hill House and its underlying messages. The house is a metaphor for the world and the people in general in the world. That probably was the most obvious. Let's dive into a couple that I myself had questions on that were not so obvious to me. The ghosts. A lot of theories I read said that Poppy was evil personified. She was the worst the house had to offer and a way to lure in unsuspecting victims. But I feel like Poppy was a psychosis manifestation, not evil. The rage that fuels Olivia's angst and torment against her family. The never-ending thoughts of betrayal and paranoia about her husband. The manifestation of wrath against the world for trying to take her children away from her. Olivia is psychologically tormented by this entity with thoughts of the worst things that you can possibly imagine. Intrusive thoughts that go far beyond just thoughts. They turn into visions. Visions of her babies being tortured by their own choices. Who wouldn't go mad on that alone? The tall man is Luke's ghost. He seems to be a manifestation of Luke's inner demons with addiction. The steps he counts when trying to get away from the ghost can represent the steps one needs to take in recovery. It represents his family and its 7 members. It represents the fact that his addiction may be masking a diagnosis of OCD, which usually includes arbitrary sorts of behaviors in order to mentally prevent anguished thoughts about improbable possibilities. The tall man also has Luke's big boy hat on, so you could say that maybe he represents the fact that Luke does not want to face responsibilities. There are so many hats this entity wears, no pun intended. The basement ghost. This one I really had to think about because it's not exactly like a recurring ghost and the encounter is pretty brief, but in a show with so much going on, I really doubt that they did anything without a distinct purpose. The bootlegger history suggests it's some man that got messed up down there. Reddit says it's like Hazel Hill's son. His representation to me is all of the things that we want to bury that will ooze up from the surface and haunt us if they're not properly dealt with. He shows up again at the funeral with soot and stuff everywhere. Everything everyone was trying to hide has bubbled to the surface, so it kind of makes sense there. They were confronted with their demons and their thoughts, and so there he was. Let's talk about the dogs on the property that the kids keep hearing and sometimes seeing that no one else sees or hears. When Shirley finds the kitties and she starts talking about the dogs, it's clear that the kitties represent all of the kids, and the dogs represent the predator that the house is, the predator that their own mom is. As long as the kitties are exposed to the elements outside of the house, the kitties are at risk, and that is so deeply representative of how Liv feels about her own children. If they are outside of the house, if they're not within her grasp, her walls, then she can't protect them, and they're just exposed to the elements outside. Olivia herself killing the only living kitty is a symbolism for her descent into the madness that the house has created. The house took her children's innocence from them, but she took their lives. It's a bit of foreshadowing to suggest that Olivia's normally nurturing personality has become a bit more ominous. Olivia's story puts a fine point on Hill House's agenda, which is to exploit insecurities and create guilt over a past that cannot be reconciled. Hill House is an endless loop, much like trauma itself. It keeps the kids and Olivia emotionally stagnant, creating turmoil and trapping them within the walls of their own minds. This trap has created ripple effects throughout the rest of their lives, throughout the rest of their relationships, even with each other, with other people, and it's something that they can't escape until they revisit the past, until they reconcile in their mind the past as it was. I wanted to take a brief look at the emotional turmoil in the show. I know there's a lot. There were so many instances of loneliness and depression that were brought up, one of the most prominent being with Nell. When she was a child in the incident when the storm happened, she felt alone and unheard. Loneliness and grief are sisters, just like fear and guilt. It is so easy to get wrapped up in grief that you let it make you reclusive. It tells you that no one understands you, that you won't ever be understood. It makes you angry, it makes you bitter. It's a feeling that traps you in your thoughts away from everyone. When Nell meets Arthur, she finally feels heard. When she loses him, she feels shunned and clingy, eventually leading her to haunt herself. She was crippled by her feelings and her depression and her loneliness. They ate her alive. Think of that, to haunt yourself, to haunt your literal self. Feeling paralyzed by her emotions and her darkness, this was such an intense display of those feelings. Luke's addiction is a manifestation of the same feelings that Nell had. It was just a different path to the same sad ending. Instead of letting the emotions eat at him, he numbed himself. But that doesn't work. That doesn't ever work. Theo shut everyone out. She built herself up brick by brick in order to avoid feeling anything at all. She maintained a degree of distance so that she could get close enough to talk to people but not love them. That was her way of dealing with everything, not knowing that at some point the walls would trap her in her own mind, creating a barrier of despair between her and the rest of the world. Shirley kept up appearances so that she would never have to see herself. She would never have to deal with the person that she had become, the person that she didn't want to show everybody else, the flawed, bitter woman who she had turned into. Stephen denied his own experiences and the experiences of those around him. He created so much turmoil within himself that he had to start writing about it to get it out. He masked it as a fictional work so that he could remain separate from those experiences. Hugh should have been there. It was a little too late, and I know he wanted to be there, but he wasn't. Olivia, you cannot save them from themselves, and in trying, you become the very thing you wanted to save them from. A monster. Okay, I worked hard on this. Please like and subscribe. Bye. See you next time.